I woke with the taste of whiskey still burning in my throat. The empty bottle cradled in my hand like a lover I'd left the night before. Sunlight seeped through the cracks in the wooden shutters, too bright for the pounding in my head. I groaned, rubbing my face, feeling the grit of a night spent on the hard floor of my parlor. A man gets used to a certain kind of roughness when he lives on his own, and I've had that kind of life for as long as I cared to remember. Didn't make mornings like this any easier, though. My grandma had done her best to straighten me out after Ma and Pa passed from tuberculosis, but I'd taken after Pa's habits more than her sensibilities. I could almost hear her voice, soft as old cloth, whispering about what whiskey and lazy ways would do to a man. I staggered up, catching sight of myself in the smudged mirror. My hair was tousled, my shirt wrinkled from sleeping in it. It didn't matter much to me. I had no one to impress and nowhere to go. The pounding in my head took a new shape when I heard a knock on the door. I cursed under my breath, half tempted to ignore it. But the knocking came again, louder and slower. Grabbing my head off the table, I moved to the door and swung it open, squinting into the morning light. There stood Judge Tuttle, upright and stiff as the cane he leaned on. He took one look at me and pursed his lips, like he was judging me without a word. "Wyatt McCall," he said, voice as dry as old parchment. "I'd ask you if you're fit for company, but it's plain as day you're not." "What do you want, Judge?" I grumbled, barely holding back a yawn. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, least of all with him. "Your grandmother's passed, boy." He said it with a kind of finality, like a nail hammered into a coffin. "I'm sorry." The words sank in slower than they should have. I stared at him, and something twisted in my gut, but I pushed it down. "Well, thanks for telling me," I muttered. "Didn't expect her to go this soon." "She was getting up there, Wyatt. Ain't nothing that could be done," he said, and for a moment his stern face softened just a flicker. "She went peacefully, in Fort Gibson. They did what they could." I nodded, jaw set tight. I didn't want him to see anything more from me. "All right then, if that's all." "That ain't all." Judge Tuttle cut me off, fishing around in his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded up letter, stained with dirt and the marks of his fingers. "She wrote you something before she passed. Made me promise to give it to you myself." I took the letter, feeling the weight of it even through the paper. There was something in the judge's eyes, something wary, as he let go. "She said it was important," he added, looking me over. "Best not let it sit too long." I ran my thumb over the paper, not quite ready to open it. "Guess I'll find out soon enough," I said, more to myself than him. "You got yourself a place to live, Wyatt. Inherited every last bit of her land and belongings," he said, tipping his hat. "I reckon she'd want you to take care of it. That house was her life." "Yeah, sure," I mumbled, stuffing the letter into my pocket. "Thanks for bringing it by." Judge Tuttle paused, glancing back at me as he turned to leave. "Take it easy, Wyatt. Not everything's best met with a bottle in hand." I shut the door and leaned against it, feeling the house settle around me, quiet as a grave. My fingers brushed against the letter in my pocket, and I could feel something waiting in that folded paper. Something that wouldn't wait forever. I sat at the rickety table in the kitchen, the letter unfolded in front of me, yellowed paper crackling under my fingers. My thumb traced the lines of her neat, looping handwriting, careful and delicate as I'd always known her to be. But as I started reading, I could almost hear her voice, trembling under the words, like she'd been scared to write it all down. "My dear Wyatt, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I always knew the time would come when I'd have to leave you on your own, but I hoped it would be a little longer, just to be sure you'd be all right. I shifted in my seat, a pang of something familiar twisted in my chest. Guilt, maybe, or regret. I let out a breath and kept reading, eyes jumping down the page. There's something hidden for you under the floorboards of my old room. I always meant to tell you about it sooner, but I feared what you'd think, or worse, what you'd do with it. The gun belonged to your grandfather, and it was his prized possession. A jolt of excitement shot through me. A gun? My grandfather's? I felt a grin creeping onto my face. This was the kind of inheritance I could get behind. I dropped the letter and headed straight for her bedroom, not caring to read the rest of the letter. With my heart pounding like a runaway horse, I headed to the old room where my grandmother kept her secrets. The floor creaked under my weight, protesting as I moved towards the spot she'd mentioned in the letter. I knelt down, fingers brushing the worn floorboards. A dull ache of anticipation thrummed in my chest. I could almost feel the weight of that pistol calling to me. Time to dig up my inheritance. After a few moments of prying, I managed to lift a corner of the floorboard. Dust and splinters filled the air, but I didn't care. With a little effort, I pulled the board aside, revealing a small potato sack hidden beneath. My fingers fumbled with the rough fabric, excitement bubbling up as I dragged it out into the light. I wasted no time, opening the sack with haste. Inside lay the gun, its barrel gleaming like a treasure beneath layers of dust. A Colt Walker. Next to it was a box of bullets, almost empty, but enough to make my heart race. I lifted the Colt Walker, feeling its weight settle comfortably in my palm. The handle was smooth, worn down by years of use. This was it. This was what my grandfather had clung to like a lifeline. I couldn't help but smirk at the thought, imagining myself as some kind of wild gunslinger. Once outside, I made my way to the edge of the property, breathing in the crisp air that filled my lungs. The world stretched out before me, a sprawling expanse of tall grass and rolling hills. The small town of Fort Gibson at least a half-hour ride away. I set my sights on a rabbit hopping along the edge of the field. I raised the Colt, steadying my breath. My hands shook not from fear, but from anticipation. There was something intoxicating about it, holding the power of life and death in my hands. I pulled the trigger, the loud crack of the gun echoing like thunder across the field. The rabbit dropped, and for a moment, silence hung in the air. A thrill rushed through me as I approached the lifeless creature, the reality of what I'd just done sinking in. The power I felt holding that Colt was eclipsed now by a rush I had never experienced before. I felt alive, euphoric. The exhilaration of the hunt was a high unlike anything I had known. It coursed through my veins, igniting something primal inside me. I knelt beside the rabbit, a wild grin spreading across my face. It was just a rabbit, but the act of taking its life had unlocked a hunger within me, a craving for more. I had found my grandfather's treasure, and it had awakened something lucky. As I stood up, the thrill still buzzing in my head, I felt unstoppable. The days rolled by with me testing the weight of that Colt Walker, my finger itching to feel its recoil again. That first rush had carved itself deep into my memory, a thrill that made ordinary life feel dim and lackluster in comparison. The rabbit had been a start, but the memory of it had faded, leaving a new, insatiable hunger gnawing at me. I found myself riding out farther from the homestead, away from curious eyes and familiar places. The land around Fort Gibson stretched wide, full of creatures big and small. And after that first kill, I started to wonder if the rush could be made stronger. What if it was more than just a rabbit? It wasn't long before I stumbled upon a deer grazing near the stream that ran along the eastern hills. The sight of it, so calm and unaware of my presence, set my pulse pounding. I could already imagine the surge waiting for me. I raised the Colt, steadying my hand, feeling the strange sense of power swelling in my chest. This was no scurrying rabbit. It was a creature of size and strength. The gunshot shattered the silence, and the deer collapsed in the grass. The impact of the kill hit me like a thunderbolt. It was a surge stronger than anything I'd felt before. A dizzying, electric high that rushed through my body and filled my mind with a giddy satisfaction. I felt invincible, as if I could take on the world and leave it begging for mercy. I stood over the deer, chest heaving, the thrill so potent that I laughed out loud. The Colt Walker, heavy and warm in my hand, felt like an extension of my arm. I wanted more. I needed more. I rode back to the homestead with a grin that I couldn't shake, the sound of that gunshot echoing in my head. Over the next few days, the craving began to eat away at me, leaving me restless and irritable. My grandmother's warning echoed faintly in the back of my mind, but I brushed it aside. This gun was mine. Whatever had happened to my grandfather didn't concern me. He'd just been weak, unable to handle the power he held in his hands. I started spending more nights at the poker tables in the town saloon, the gun never far from reach. I played cards, drank my fill, and eyed the locals, sizing up men who seemed easy enough to provoke. I could feel myself changing, slipping into a darkness that crept in whenever I felt that Colt resting against my hip. And each time I thought about what lay ahead, the thrill, the hunt, the next kill, the craving only grew sharper. I was unknowingly walking the same path as my grandfather, and though I knew it was wrong deep down, I couldn't stop myself. The power was too great, the high too sweet. As I rode back that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but I put it down to the whiskey and the lingering thrill. Besides, I had a Colt, and nothing could harm me with that kind of power by my side. The saloon was alive with noise, smoke, and a buzz of stares that only half knew to keep their distance. I was on a winning streak, coins piling up in front of me as I eyed my opponents. I'd taken to cheating, only a little at first, but tonight, I was riding the luck that the Colts seemed to pour into my hand. Even when they noticed, none of them dared to call me out, not when I was packing. And then it happened. The man across from me, a wiry, sun-beaten rancher with eyes dark as coal, finally had enough of my winning grin. He stood, slammed his fist down on the table so hard the glasses rattled. "You got a funny way of winning, boy," he growled, his fingers twitching toward his holster. The room went deadly quiet. I barely felt my hand move for the Colt. It seemed to leap from my hip to my hand before I even thought it. The rancher's gun never cleared the leather. The shot was deafening. For a second, all I saw was smoke, and then the man slumped forward, a dark red stain spreading across his chest. The high hit me like lightning, stronger and more electric than anything I'd felt before. My heart pounded like it was about to split my ribs, my head swimming with that rush of power that made everything around me seem small, distant, unimportant. I collected my winnings, tossed a coin to the bartender, and strode out, a trail of eyes watching me with fear and anger, but I barely noticed. I was too far gone in that feeling, that rush, that taste of power. I climbed onto my horse, hardly steady enough to swing a leg over, but riding high on the victory. The night swallowed me as I rode back, swaying in the saddle, humming an old tune I barely remembered. The chill air whipped against my face, but I didn't care. I'd won. I'd shown them who was boss. But I didn't see the shadows trailing me. A few men riding low in their saddles, guns strapped tight to their sides. Men who hadn't forgotten what I'd done back at the saloon. Men with vengeance on their minds. The rush from the colt was fading, but my mind was too clouded to notice the quiet, stealthy hoofbeats behind me, the whispers in the dark that were closing in. I swayed in the saddle, barely holding on as I reached the house, the weight of that colt feeling like it had seeped into my bones, dragging me down, though I didn't mind. Even through the haze, I felt powerful, like I owned the night, the land, the air itself. My house loomed up before me, a welcoming shadow against the pale starlight. Sliding off my horse, I stumbled up to the door, grinning like a fool. But before my hand even touched the latch, a voice cut through the night, cold as steel. "Wyatt!" My blood ran cold as ice. I whipped around, the colt already in my grip, pointed towards the blackness. 3 figures emerged, rifles aimed, faces I dimly recognized from the saloon. My hand shook a little, but I felt that pulse of power thrumming in the pistol, steadying my aim. The one in the center spat on the ground. "You cheated our friend out of his life. You think you're some kind of legend? That gun don't make you a god, boy!" I sneered, feeling the colt's weight in my palm, solid, warm. I aimed at the man in the middle, heart racing. "Want to find out for yourself?" We fired in the same heartbeat. Bullets tore through the night. I felt the shock of metal hitting me in the side, the sharp sting of pain cutting through the haze. But the colt had spoken, and the 2 of them fell to the ground, dead silent. The last man staggered, his gun dropped, a look of pure rage twisting in his face before he collapsed in the dirt. It was over, the stillness of death settling around me. I stumbled backward, the warmth of my own blood trickling down my side as I clutched the wound. Dizzy, I staggered inside, slamming the door shut, breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain pulsed, and my hand clutched at the desk to steady myself. That's when I saw it, the letter, still lying open, right where I tossed it. I slumped into the chair, the room spinning, and for reasons I couldn't explain, my eyes drifted down to the words I'd ignored before. A faint memory drifted back to me of Grandma's voice, soft, worried as I slowly finished the letter. "The gun was his prized possession, his luck. He'd never let it out of his sight. He got so twisted with greed, Wyatt. Each bullet it took, a part of him went with it." I kept reading, eyes blurring as pain surged in my chest. "Your grandfather was a gambler, a man drawn to high stakes and the thrill of a winning hand. He won the Colt Walker in a poker game, a high-stakes game in Kansas City, the kind men died over. They say he cheated, though I never asked him how he came to win. With every win, he'd said it was his lucky gun that brought him fortune. He carried it everywhere, used it when his cheating got him into more trouble than he could talk his way out of. His heart blackened with every kill, till the gun demanded more. But one day, his luck ran dry. It wasn't his own skill that got him shot, Wyatt, but the curse that grew stronger with each life. It's a thing of blood, a hunger that takes without end. I felt my pulse slowing, my breaths becoming shallower, each word sinking in like a nail. If you're reading this, Wyatt, heed my warning. If that gun's in your hands, let it go before it takes you with it. The Colt lay beside me, still warm, still heavy. The high, that rush I'd been chasing. Suddenly, it felt like ice in my veins, sharp as steel. I tried to let go of the Colt, but my fingers wouldn't move. The weight, that cursed pull, held me fast, draining the last of my strength as the room faded to black. In the silence, the gun seemed to hum, like it was drinking in that final breath I'd had left, sealing its curse as it claimed one more soul. Greed blinds a man to his own ruin, and a thirst for power leaves a curse that never fades. Beware what you hold too tightly, for it may someday claim you too. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this shorter take on the stories I usually do. And I wanted to do something Old West because I like Old West horror, and I think that should be a genre that should be encouraged. And it also gives me an excuse to use Southern accents, which I really do enjoy doing. I might not do them the best, but I have fun, and I think that's what's important. Okay, let's talk about the AI. Everything here was pretty much prompted and created by me. The AI just played along. So this was basically about 80% me. So this whole story, the idea, everything, was just something that clicked in my head, and I said, you know what? I need to get this into a story. Alright, now it's plug time. I do have a Buy Me a Coffee link. It's not required, but completely appreciated. I do go through a lot of coffee when I'm doing my creative processes. You can also find me on Rumble as well as YouTube. And remember, it's okay to be scary. I am too. Embrace the strange, embrace creativity, and I will see you later.